During this video, I'll share how to set up a provider. To begin with setting up a provider, navigate to the main menu and click on Setup. Click on Provider and the Provider list page will open. Practice Suite allows you to have an unlimited number of providers set up in the system, where each provider can have their own specialty and their own individual tax IDs if needed to bill separately. Let's say we have a practice with two different providers. Let's look at how to set up this provider. When you sign up for the free version, it will be a single provider version where you'll only have one entry here. To modify this provider, click on the Edit button and the Provider Information screen will open. On this provider screen, enter the last name of the provider, the first name of the provider, the middle name, and a code is generated based on the last and first name. A lot of reporting in Practice Suite is driven by a provider's code, which are essentially the initials of the provider's name for reporting and navigation purposes. Enter the credentials of the provider, and from the Type drop-down menu, you can select different types of providers, like whether the provider is a chiropractor or assistant physician. If you want to set up different types of equipment that you want to display as a dummy provider, you can also do that. In the Gender and Address field, enter the details and click on the checkbox if the address is the same as the practice. In the Contact and Other fields, enter the phone number, the fax number, email of work and personal, and the language spoken. The significance of language spoken is when you set up a portal or when you use the Practice Suite portal module. This information gets published on the portal as to what are the spoken languages the provider speaks, so that patients can know which provider to pick based on any linguistic preferences. Enter the phone number to text messages. On the right side is the provider's signature screen. You can scan and upload the signature here. This signature is essentially utilized on the clinical side. When the provider completes a note, this signature is embedded into the note. The feature is only available for paid additional upgrades. Coming to the Specialty Information field, enter the Federal Tax ID, and by default, it's essentially the same as the practice's Federal Tax ID. Next is the individual NPI ID of the provider. You can look up the NPI of the provider by clicking on the NPI registry link. There are cases where you want to set up a separate tax ID or bill the providers using the provider's social security number, or a case where a provider is visiting a practice and this provider wants to use their own tax ID to be billed to have a separate billing, which you can do an override billing by specifying the appropriate tax ID. DEA number field is required for prescribing providers. The UPIN number is not really required with the event of NPI unless you have a specific payer that requires you to send a legacy ID. In most cases, you do not require a legacy ID, so you can leave this blank. The state license number needs to be completed to be used in your prescriptions and in certain cases of sending claims. Signature on file is defaulted to yes, and signature date is the date when the signature was on file. This is used when you send claims on paper and you have a signature on file with the payer to send a paper claim without needing to sign it. If you don't know the date, default the date to a historical date preceding the claim. Specialty you can select by clicking on the three dots. You can select the appropriate specialty from the list. Moving towards the right side, the scheduler option. If you have a multi-provider scenario where you want to only bill one provider but not put it in a scheduler, for example, you have a provider which you want to bill for but only sees patients outside the facility or does not follow the scheduler, then you can select this box and hide that provider from the appointment scheduler. Listing order field essentially says to which column the provider needs to be listed. Let's say if there are 3 providers in the practice and you want this provider to be the third column in the scheduler, we can control it by specifying the order as 3 in this field. And if you want to display a different name in the scheduler, you can override the name by entering the name in this field here. This is mostly used by practices where there are nurse practitioners or physician's assistants who see patients under the name of supervising MD, so you will essentially put the information of the nurse practitioner, and behind the scenes, the billing is done under the MD or supervising physician. When you select yes in the claim form, the referring physician is defaulted to the rendering provider, which is a Medicare claim requirement. Select the appropriate specialization from the drop-down of specialization. This information is utilized in the portal. Medicare assignment is defaulted to yes if the provider sees Medicare patients. Accept New Patient and Display Portal are again used when you set up a Practice Suite portal, as this information gets displayed on the provider screen to let the patient know the provider is accepting new patients. Provider legal information. What Practice Suite allows you to do is have one provider be made available in multiple locations. What that means is, let's say I have one provider and two locations. You'll see there are two different location IDs. For example, if there are two locations, one in San Francisco and the other location in another area, you can say that this provider needs to be available in both locations, or he or she will only need to see patients in one location. So depending upon what is selected, as you move on to the scheduler or other parts of the application, the provider information will be available along with the legal entity and all the locations to know that yes, this provider is working at this location. And when the provider is not working in that location, you can just unselect the location. Superbill template. We have the ability to select a pre-printed superbill that can be printed from the scheduler. And if you're printing this particular provider scheduler, then which superbill should be selected? So you just need to select the appropriate superbill templates. In this case, there is only one superbill. If you have multiple superbills, it will give a list of other superbills, and you can identify the appropriate superbill. If the provider is no longer with the practice, then you can just put an end date on the practice. As stated in previous videos, there is no physical delete capability once data has been saved in Practice Suite. So all you would do is put an end date or mark it as inactive, which means that after this end date becomes effective, this provider will no longer see patients. But the provider's historical appointments, charges, and clinical records will remain in the system until this date. Going forward, this provider's information will not be available in any of the drop-down lists in the scheduler, the reporting, or the clinical side, so that this provider is considered as an inactive provider. In our free version, you have the capability to set up one provider. To add any new providers, you'll need to call our sales office and they will set up an additional provider for you. To summarize, we've just covered how to set up a new provider.